So I want everybody to take a second and think about what the most significant scientific achievement in human history is. You've got the first airplane, you've got the internet, you've got the invention of the cell phone, you've got electricity. But what about something else? What if the most significant achievement we've ever made was taking someone from the Earth about 30 to 40 years ago and putting them on the moon? The first time in human history that anyone or anything had ever left the planet and landed on another celestial body. That was an extremely important achievement when it happened in the 1960s, but the government currently and since then has been reducing funding toward these critical programs at NASA. Today I want to go over a little bit about how that funding works and why we need to rally the government to increase it. So I want to start off with the current NASA budget. In fiscal year 2011, we spent $18.4 billion on NASA as an entire agency, the Climate Sciences Division, the Planetary Science Division, and all other missions of NASA. This was only 0.5% of the overall federal budget. It was a drop in the bucket, like cents on the dollar of every piece of funding that we passed for the government. And even with that small amount of money, NASA managed to produce a lot of critical and important scientific research throughout 2011. We got climate research, data from satellites showing us how the climate was changing and how global warming was changing the planet that we live on. We got fishery management data from various satellites that showed us how fish are migrating and how we can continue to save the populations of fish that we need to survive. And we developed the plan for the first U.S. asteroid mission, mirroring the European Space Agency's Philae and Rosetta probes. We want to land a satellite on another asteroid and gather critical data on the composition of the asteroid, the movement of the asteroid, and whether or not we can extract resources from them in the future. But despite all these advances, in 2012, and this trend has continued to this day, $700 million was slashed from the NASA budget. This was an extremely difficult and great obstacle for NASA that slashed a lot of critical programs and took away their ability to continue their work. This is a chart from 1962 to 2014 of the overall amount of money that NASA received. Right here at this peak in 1968 was the Apollo program when we landed on the moon. Public interest tapered off as the Cold War ended and we didn't have a reason to compete with the Soviets anymore. And it continued to drop as the space shuttle was launched, the space shuttle was retired, the beginning of the Constellation program, and then budgets allocated to return to the moon, explore Mars, and continue throughout our solar system. And that's information that was taken from the Lunar and Planetary Institute. So the research that NASA has accomplished, even in the face of all of these budget cuts, we've got the International Space Station, which is the most advanced and largest laboratory in international scientific effort in history. It's currently orbiting above the Earth. Astronauts from dozens of countries go there and perform scientific research, fostering a spirit of peace and goodwill among the entire planet. They're working now with private industry to commercialize the space station and allow private enterprise to dock ships and send scientists and crew and cargo there. They're working on dark matter research. If we manage to detect dark matter with our orbital laboratories, we could solve the overall model of physics that's been eluding us since the 1920s. We've got environmental research from space that I mentioned earlier, which is providing us with the best insight we have in how our planet's being affected by climate change. As they've been cooperating with private industry, this is one of SpaceX's newest future manned craft. SpaceX, Orbital ATK, and a handful of other companies have been providing the critical amount of funding and research that's needed to get us back into space and back ahead. Human crews are only a few decades away. Shortly after that, we'll be able to send people to Mars. The environmental research performed by NASA has provided invaluable satellite data that we couldn't get any other way. It showed us how the climate is changing, how greenhouse gases are spreading across the planet, and how we can potentially stop it. Climate change has been a huge issue in the scientific community, and very few scientific organizations worldwide are doing as much as NASA to combat, track, and figure out how to manage it. They've got several incredibly important scientific programs that are planned that they'll need money to finance. The Orbiting Carbon Observatory will be able to track the overall amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and map where it is and help us figure out how to predict the future of our climate as it changes. Manned Mars missions are planned by 2030. They're going to use this capsule, which is NASA's answer to SpaceX's Dragon manned capsule, the Orion. And they want to be able to send scientists to Mars so that we can research different ways that we can start inhabiting other planets. In 2020, they want to send another Mars rover to collect more scientific data than we've already got from Pathfinder and Sojourner. And all of this total knowledge that we're gaining from our space science is giving us a better picture of our Earth and how the environment, how the ecosystem, how everything comes together based off of how it comes together on different parts of the solar system. The OCO3, or Orbiting Carbon Observatory, is just a quick overview of it. It's going to monitor CO2 from space, track carbon emissions, and increase our understanding of climate change. That's the planned picture of the satellite right there from NASA. This is the third such mission, and it's going to be much more comprehensive than the other two. This is a timeline from NASA of our overall move to Mars. Each step on this way here is another step toward landing on the planet. We've got the Hubble Space Telescope that's provided us with a lot of insight into the universe, the International Space Station, the new Space Launch System rocket that's supposed to be able to reach Mars, the Orion capsule, these Mars missions leading up to the Mars transfer craft that should be able to drop astronauts onto the surface. Federal budget overall largely is spent on defense. NASA consumes only a tiny portion of this triangle for scientific funding. The money can be put to use to further science rather than only furthering war. Scientific cooperation between all of the nations that participate in the space program breeds peace, and it's important for the future of humanity and of our planet. So before I finish up here, I wanted to take a second and see if anybody had any questions.
So, my first one is you spent a lot of time talking about SpaceX versus NASA. Almost like there's almost like an implication that are they competing? Because you said that like you had a spacecraft that was NASA's answer to what SpaceX is doing.
So currently, NASA is using federal funding to build a craft that they want to use as a backup. The idea is that private industry will be able to support the space program and help us get to the point where the government can start picking up more funding and assisting private industry to get us further into space.
So at this point, like the way I see it, that the private funding right now will eventually very much benefit NASA.
Yes.
If we're getting enough private funding and going out and doing all these cool things, then maybe the government's going to be like, oh, this is really cool.
Yeah, it's going to provide a lot of incentive for the government to get back into funding space science and research. Are there any other questions?
As far as percentage of the federal budget goes, how much, as far as in budget requests, would NASA consider to be adequate for future projects, like as a percentage of the?
Currently, it would be an improvement even if we could get back to the 0.5% that it was in 2011. Even getting up to spending 1% of the federal budget would be a huge boon that would allow us to continue a lot of the research that's being canceled because the government can't afford it anymore.
So are things like they're retiring the Hubble not in the near future? I can't remember exactly when it is. But like the Hubble is still something that is going out and finding new galaxies on a weekly basis. So I don't understand like why something like that is being defunded.
So the overall concern is that the government doesn't see an immediate benefit from the research, and so they spend more money on things like developing new terrestrial aircraft or developing new government defense satellites.
Like Juno, going to Jupiter and things like that. Okay.
Yeah. The deep space exploration gets cut a lot because there isn't an immediate benefit so much as an overall scientific benefit in the future.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep.
That was a little more than 2 minutes of question. Okay,